Officer Martinez never expected the scared teenager she'd just roughed up to have a father who could shut down an entire city block. But when Marcus Williams stepped out of that black sedan 5 minutes later, badge glinting in the afternoon sun, the ground beneath the precinct seemed to shift. Some fathers carry pictures in their wallets. Others, the summer heat pressed down on Riverside Avenue like a suffocating blanket, turning the asphalt into a shimmering mirage that made everything look distorted, including the truth. 17-year-old Zoe Williams wiped sweat from her forehead. As she adjusted the straps of her heavy backpack, the weight of her camera equipment pulling at her shoulders, the photography workshop at the community center had run late, but she didn't mind. Golden hour was approaching, and the abandoned warehouse district offered perfect lighting for her portfolio project. She'd been walking for maybe 10 minutes, when the patrol car's engine growled behind her. "Hey, you there?" Zoe's stomach dropped. She knew that tone, the one that turned a simple encounter into something else entirely. Slowly, she turned around. Officer Sarah Martinez stepped out of the black and white cruiser, her hand resting casually on her belt. At 32, Martinez had been with the Riverside Police Department for 8 years, long enough to develop certain assumptions about kids walking alone in this neighborhood, especially kids who looked like Zoe. "What's in the bag?" Martinez called out, her voice carrying across the empty street. "Camera equipment," Zoe replied, keeping her voice steady despite the familiar flutter of anxiety in her chest. "I was at a photography workshop." Martinez approached slowly, her eyes scanning Zoe from head to toe with the practiced assessment of someone looking for trouble. "Photography workshop, huh? In this neighborhood? At the community center?" Zoe shifted the backpack slightly, trying to ease the pressure on her shoulders. "I can show you, don't move." The command was sharp, immediate. Martinez's demeanor shifted from casual curiosity to active suspicion. "Keep your hands where I can see them." Zoe's heart began to race. This was escalating too quickly, spinning out of control like a car on black ice. "Officer, I haven't done anything wrong. I'm just walking home." "Walking home from where?" "Exactly." Martinez moved closer, close enough that Zoe could smell her coffee breath and see the small scar above her left eyebrow. "And don't lie to me, kid. I've heard every story in the book." "I told you. The community center, the Jefferson Community Center on 5th Street. Ms. Rodriguez runs the summer program." The words tumbled out faster now, desperation creeping into Zoe's voice. "You can call her. You can check." But Martinez wasn't listening anymore. Her training had kicked in, or what she called training. Really? It was 8 years of assumptions crystallized into instinct. 8 years of seeing what she expected to see, rather than what was actually there. "Turn around. Put your hands on the wall." Zoe's voice cracked. "Why?" "Because I said so." Martinez's hand moved to her radio. "We've had reports of break-ins in this area. Kids your age, carrying backpacks, casing houses." The lie came so easily, it might have been true. Martinez had learned long ago that reports could be flexible things, shaped by necessity and justified later in paperwork. She'd never actually received any such reports, but who would check? Zoe's mind raced. She thought about her father's advice, delivered with the weight of experience and love. Always comply. Keep your hands visible. Don't give them any reason. But she also thought about her rights, about the Constitution she'd studied in AP government, about the principle that being black and young and carrying a backpack wasn't a crime. "I want to call my father," she said quietly. Martinez laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Your father? What's Daddy gonna do? Sue the police department?" If only she knew. "Please." Zoe tried again. "I just want to show you my student ID, photography club membership card." "I have documentation," I said. "Turn around." Martinez's voice rose, attracting the attention of a few pedestrians across the street. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be." Zoe's hands trembled as she slowly turned toward the brick wall of the abandoned storefront. The surface was rough against her palms, still warm from absorbing the day's heat. Behind her, she heard Martinez calling for backup, describing a suspicious juvenile and possible burglary tools. The irony wasn't lost on her. Her camera, the tool she used to capture truth, to document the world as it really was, had been transformed into evidence of criminal intent by nothing more than assumption and bias. Martinez began searching through Zoe's backpack with rough efficiency, pulling out expensive camera lenses, a tripod, memory cards, and photography notebooks filled with lighting diagrams and composition sketches. Each item should have supported Zoe's story, but Martinez arranged them on the hood of her patrol car like pieces of evidence in a crime that existed only in her imagination. "Expensive equipment for a kid from this neighborhood," Martinez muttered, loud enough for Zoe to hear. "Where'd you steal this from?" The accusation hit Zoe like a physical blow. "I didn't steal anything. My father bought me that camera for my birthday. I earned it 8-time made honor roll. I got accepted to the summer program at the Arts Institute." "Sure you did." Martinez's tone dripped skepticism. "And I suppose Daddy's a lawyer too." Again, if only she knew. A second patrol car arrived, driven by Officer Tom Bradley, a 20-year veteran who'd learned to navigate the complexities of police work with something approaching wisdom. He stepped out slowly, taking in the scene. A teenage girl pressed against a wall, expensive camera equipment spread across a patrol car hood, and Martinez wearing the expression of someone who'd already decided how this story would end. "Do we have here, Martinez?" Bradley asked, though his tone suggested he was already forming his own conclusions. "Possible burglary suspect," Martinez replied without looking at him. "Found her walking through the warehouse district with thousands of dollars worth of electronics. Claims she was at some photography class." Bradley walked over to examine the equipment. Unlike Martinez, he actually knew something about cameras. His daughter was studying journalism at State, and he'd helped her pick out her first professional setup. These weren't the cheap knockoffs that typically showed up in stolen goods cases. This was legitimate high-end equipment, well-maintained and properly organized. "Did you check her story?" Bradley asked quietly. Martinez's jaw tightened. She didn't appreciate being questioned, especially not in front of the suspect. "I was in the process of conducting my investigation when you arrived," but she hadn't checked. She hadn't called the community center. She hadn't looked at Zoe's student ID, or her photography club membership card, or any of the documentation that would have confirmed the truth in less than 2 minutes. She'd made her decision the moment she'd seen a black teenager with expensive equipment in a neighborhood where she'd decided such things didn't belong. Bradley pulled out his phone and dialed the Jefferson Community Center. After a brief conversation with someone named Ms. Rodriguez, he hung up and walked back to Martinez. "She's telling the truth," he said simply. Rodriguez confirmed she was there until about 30 minutes ago. Advanced photography workshop for gifted students. Martinez's face flushed red. "That doesn't mean it means exactly what it means," Bradley interrupted, his voice carrying the authority of 2 decades on the force. "This is a student going home from a legitimate program with her own legitimate equipment." But Martinez had gone too far to back down gracefully. Her pride, her assumptions, her 8 years of habits, they all demanded that she be right, that this somehow still be justified. She was acting suspicious, Martinez insisted. Nervous. Evasive. Zoe finally turned around, her eyes bright with unshed tears of frustration and humiliation. "I was nervous because you were treating me like a criminal for no reason. I was evasive, because you wouldn't listen to me when I tried to explain." "Watch your tone," Martinez snapped, stepping closer. "I don't like your attitude." And that's when it happened. Later, both Bradley and the security camera from the bodega across the street would confirm the sequence of events. But in the moment, it unfolded with terrible inevitability. Martinez reached out, ostensibly to grab Zoe's arm, to assert physical control over a situation that was slipping away from her psychologically. Zoe, operating on instinct and 17 years of her father's warnings about sudden movements around police, pulled back reflexively. Martinez interpreted the reflexive movement as resistance. Her training, the real training this time, not the assumptions, kicked in. She grabbed Zoe's wrist and yanked hard, spinning the teenager around and slamming her against the brick wall with enough force to scrape skin from her cheek. "Don't resist," Martinez shouted, though Zoe wasn't resisting anything except the physics of being thrown against a wall. Bradley moved forward immediately. "Martinez, that's enough." But Martinez was in full escalation mode now, her adrenaline spiking, her judgment clouded by the toxic mixture of embarrassment and authority. She pulled out her handcuffs. "You're under arrest for obstruction of justice and resisting an officer." The charges were fabricated on the spot, creative interpretations of a situation that had never required arrest in the first place. But Martinez and the silence stretched between them like a taut wire, vibrating with unspoken implications. Martinez felt sweat beading on her forehead despite the late afternoon breeze, and it had nothing to do with the summer heat. She'd made a career of reading people, of understanding the dynamics of power and authority. But standing face to face with Marcus Williams, she realized she'd been playing checkers while he lived in a world of chess. "Mr. Williams," she began, her voice catching slightly. "If I'd known what—" Marcus interrupted, his tone still conversational, almost curious. "Known that my daughter deserved basic human dignity. Known that a 17-year-old with expensive equipment might have actually earned it legitimately. Or known that her father had the authority to make your life very complicated." Martinez opened her mouth, then closed it. Each possible answer felt like stepping into quicksand. Bradley approached cautiously, his radio crackling with dispatcher chatter. "Sir, I've already called for a supervisor. Captain Morrison should be here within." "That won't be necessary," Marcus said without taking his eyes off Martinez. "Officer Bradley, would you please remove the handcuffs from my daughter? I assume the charges, whatever they were, are being dropped." It wasn't a request. Bradley looked at Martinez, who nodded stiffly. As he moved toward the patrol car, Marcus finally shifted his attention away from Martinez, and she felt like she could breathe again until she realized this was just the eye of the storm. Marcus watched through the window as Bradley helped Zoe out of the patrol car and removed the handcuffs. His daughter was trying to maintain her composure, but he could see the tremor in her hands, the way she unconsciously touched her scraped cheek, the careful way she moved her wrists where the metal had bitten into her skin. "Daddy." Zoe's voice was small, younger than her 17 years. Marcus opened his arms and she fell into them, finally allowing the tears she'd been holding back to come. Over her head, Marcus studied the scene with prosecutor's eyes. The expensive camera, equipment still spread across the patrol car, who'd like evidence of some imaginary crime, the gathering crowd of onlookers with their phones out, the way Martinez kept shifting her weight from foot to foot like she wanted to run. "Are you hurt?" he asked softly, pulling back to examine the scrape on Zoe's cheek. "It's not bad," she said, though they both knew that wasn't really what he was asking. Some hurts went deeper than scraped skin. Marcus nodded, then turned back to Martinez. "Officer, I'd like to understand exactly what probable cause you had for detaining my daughter." Martinez had been dreading this question, but she'd also been preparing for it. 8 years of police work had taught her that the best defense was a good offense, and that confidence could sometimes substitute for facts. "We received reports of break-ins in this area," she said, straightening her shoulders. "Your daughter matched the description of suspects seen in the vicinity. When I approached her for questioning, she became evasive and showed signs of nervousness consistent with criminal behavior. It was a textbook answer, the kind of boilerplate justification that had protected countless officers in countless similar situations. It was also, Marcus recognized immediately, complete fiction. "What reports?" he asked simply. "Sir, what reports of break-ins? I'd like the case numbers, the dates, the complainants' names." Martinez felt the ground shifting beneath her again. "I don't have that information immediately available, Officer Bradley." Marcus turned to the veteran cop. "Are you familiar with any recent break-ins in this area?" Bradley's weathered face tightened. He'd been hoping to stay out of this too. Let Martinez dig her own grave without getting his hands dirty. But Marcus Williams wasn't the kind of man who accepted silence as neutrality. "No, sir," Bradley said quietly. "There haven't been any reported break-ins in this sector for over 6 weeks." The words hung in the air like an indictment. Martinez felt her carefully constructed narrative crumbling, but she was too deep in to back down now. "Perhaps Officer Bradley isn't aware of all active investigations." Officer Martinez, Marcus's voice cut through her words like a blade. "Are you suggesting that you responded to reports that weren't filed through proper channels? Reports that your colleague and I are somehow unaware of?" Each question was a trap, and Martinez could feel herself stumbling toward them. As a federal prosecutor, Marcus had spent years dismantling false testimony, exposing the little lies that officers told to justify questionable actions. He knew every dodge, every deflection, every semantic game that separated truth from convenient fiction. "I may have been mistaken about the specific reports," Martinez said finally, her voice getting smaller. "I see. So what we have is this. You approached my daughter without any reported criminal activity in the area, determined she was suspicious, based on what criteria exactly?" Martinez looked around desperately, as if the answer might be written on the buildings around them. A small crowd had gathered, mostly neighbors from the community, people who'd heard the commotion and come to see what was happening. Among them, she spotted Mrs. Chen from the corner market, old Mr. Thompson who fed stray cats behind the laundromat, and several teenagers who probably knew Zoe from school. They were all watching, they were all listening, and they all had phones. "She was carrying expensive equipment in a high-crime area," Martinez said, grasping for any justification that might hold water. "High-crime area." Marcus looked around at the residential street with its small businesses, community garden, and freshly painted crosswalk. According to whose statistics? Before Martinez could answer, Mrs. Chen stepped forward from the crowd. She was a small woman in her 60s, but her voice carried clearly across the street. "Excuse me," she said, "but this is not a high-crime area. This is my neighborhood. I've lived here for 23 years, and I know this girl. She walks past my store every day after her photography class. She's never caused any trouble." "That's right," called out Mr. Thompson. "Zoe's a good kid. Helps me carry groceries sometimes." More voices joined in, a chorus of community members vouching for Zoe, describing a neighborhood that bore no resemblance to Martinez's high-crime area. With each testimonial, Martinez's justifications grew thinner, more transparent. Marcus listened to the voices with the satisfaction of a prosecutor watching a hostile witness contradict themselves on the stand. But he also felt something else, a deep warmth at hearing his daughter described with such obvious affection by people who had no reason to lie for her. "Officer Martinez," he said when the voices quieted, "it seems the community disagrees with your assessment, so let me ask again. What specific, articulable facts led you to believe my daughter was engaged in criminal activity?" Martinez's mouth worked silently for several seconds. The truth that she'd seen a black teenager with expensive equipment and made assumptions based on nothing more than bias was impossible to say out loud. But every alternative explanation had been systematically dismantled. "I was exercising reasonable police discretion based on my training and experience," she said finally. "Your training," Marcus repeated slowly. "Tell me, Officer Martinez, what part of your training taught you that photography equipment constitutes burglary tools? What part of your experience suggested that a student ID and community center membership were indicators of criminal intent?" Behind him, Zoe was quietly gathering her equipment from the patrol car hood, checking each lens for damage, her movements careful and precise. Several community members had approached to help, treating her camera gear with the respect of people who understood its value and purpose. Martinez watched this tableau with the obvious care with which Zoe handled her equipment, the way the neighbors interacted with her like family, the complete absence of anything remotely criminal, and felt her last defenses crumble. "Perhaps I made an error in judgment," she admitted, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. "An error in judgment," Marcus repeated. "Is that what we're calling it?" A new voice cut through the tension. "What the hell is going on here?" Captain David Morrison approached with the heavy stride of a man who'd spent 30 years cleaning up other people's mistakes. At 55, Morrison had seen every variety of police screw-up, from minor procedural violations to career-ending catastrophes. But as he took in the signed Marcus Williams's federal credentials, the camera, equipment, the crowd of witnesses, and Martinez's obvious panic, he recognized this as something potentially worse than a simple mistake. "Captain Morrison," Marcus extended his hand. "Marcus Williams, FBI Civil Rights Division. I believe one of your officers has had an interesting encounter with my daughter." Morrison shook the offered hand while his mind raced through the implications. The FBI Civil Rights Division didn't investigate routine police stops. They investigated patterns of constitutional violations, systematic abuses of power, and the kind of incidents that ended up on national news and in federal consent decrees. "Mr. Williams," Morrison said carefully, "I apologize for any inconvenience. If there's been a misunderstanding, Captain, let me be very clear about what happened here." Marcus's voice remained calm, but there was steel underneath. "Your officer detained my daughter without probable cause, searched her belongings without consent, physically assaulted her when she tried to exercise her constitutional rights, and then falsely arrested her on fabric." The video had been online for 3 hours when Detective Ray Santos found Officer Martinez sitting in her patrol car at 2 a.m., still parked on the same street where everything had gone wrong. Her radio was turned off, her phone face down on the passenger seat, and she was staring straight ahead at nothing with the hollow expression of someone watching their world collapse in real time. Santos tapped on the window. He was Martinez's training officer from 6 years ago, the closest thing she had to a mentor on the force, and probably the only person who would come looking for her tonight. "Sarah," he said when she finally rolled down the window, "you can't stay here. Have you seen it?" she asked without looking at him. The video. Santos had seen it. Everyone had seen it. By midnight, #JusticeForZoe was trending nationally, and the 30-second clip of Martinez slamming a teenage girl against a brick wall had been viewed over 2 million times. The angle captured everything: Zoe's hands clearly visible and non-threatening, the violent way Martinez grabbed her, the obvious disproportion between the alleged crime and the response. But worse than the video were the details that had emerged. In its wake, investigative journalists working at internet speed had already pulled together Zoe's academic records, her scholarship to the prestigious Riverside Arts Academy, testimonials from teachers and community members. They'd identified her father within hours and connected the dots to his work with the Civil Rights Division. The narrative was devastating in its simplicity. An accomplished young black woman brutalized by police for the crime of walking home with a camera, while her father, a man dedicated to fighting exactly this kind of injustice, was forced to watch his own daughter become a victim of the system he'd spent his career trying to reform. "Sarah, you need to call the union rep," Santos said gently. "You need a lawyer." Martinez finally looked at him, and Santos was shocked by what he saw. Her eyes were red-rimmed and hollow, her usually immaculate uniform wrinkled and stained with sweat. She looked like she'd aged 10 years in 10 hours. "Ray," she said quietly, "I fucked up. Really, really fucked up." It was the first time Santos had ever heard her admit to a mistake, and it came too late to matter. "The union can still know." Martinez shook her head. "You haven't seen the whole thing. The crowd, the witnesses, the father. Ray, her father is Marcus Williams." Santos felt his stomach drop. He knew that name, knew what it meant. "Jesus, Sarah, what were you thinking?" "I wasn't thinking, that's the problem." Martinez finally turned off the engine. "I saw what I expected to see. I reacted like I always react, except this time, there were consequences." At that moment, 15 miles across town, Marcus Williams was sitting in his home office at 2:17 a.m., surrounded by documents that would have made Martinez's situation infinitely worse if she'd known they existed. On his desk were printouts of 3 formal complaints filed against Martinez in the past 2 years, complaints that had been investigated by Internal Affairs and quietly dismissed. There was Mrs. Rodriguez, elderly grandmother, roughed up during a traffic stop for failure to comply when she'd been confused by Martinez's rapid-fire English commands. There was James Mitchell, college senior, detained for 2 hours, and charged with disorderly conduct for asking too many questions about why his car was being searched. There was Nina Foster, single mother, arrested in front of her children for obstruction when she'd tried to film Martinez's interaction with her teenage son. All black, all dismissed, all part of a pattern that Internal Affairs had somehow failed to notice. Marcus had requested these files through federal channels 6 hours ago, and they'd been quietly delivered by an FBI colleague who understood the implications. This wasn't an isolated incident, it was the latest in a series of constitutional violations that Martinez had been allowed to commit with impunity. His phone buzzed with a text from Zoe. Can't sleep. Keep thinking about the other kids, she's probably done this too. Marcus looked across the hall to his daughter's room, where light still leaked from under the door. Zoe had barely spoken during dinner, had picked at her food, had answered her mother's concerned questions with monosyllables. But that text revealed what Marcus had suspected. His daughter wasn't just processing her own trauma. She was thinking about systemic injustice, about the countless other young people who'd encountered Martinez without the protection of a federal prosecutor for a father. He texted back, "That's exactly why we're going to do something about it."
What
kind of something? Marcus stared at the files on his desk, at the pattern of abuse that internal affairs had ignored, at the institutional failure that had allowed Martinez to operate without consequences for years. Then he picked up his phone and dialed a number he'd hoped never to use for personal reasons. "Williams, do you know what time it is?" The voice belonged to Janet Chen, U.S. Attorney for the Eastern District, Marcus's former boss and current ally in the endless war against civil rights violations. "Janet, I need to open a federal investigation into the Riverside Police Department. Pattern and practice violations, Section 1983 claims, possible consent decree." There was a long pause. "Marcus, this is about your daughter, isn't it?" "This is about my daughter, and at least 3 other people that I know of so far. How many more do you think we'll find when we really start looking?" Another pause. Janet Chen had been a prosecutor for 22 years, long enough to recognize the tone of a colleague who'd moved past anger into the cold, methodical pursuit of justice. "Send me everything you have," she said finally. "I'll convene a grand jury by Thursday." At 3:47 a.m., Chief Patterson was awakened by a call from the mayor's office. His phone had been ringing all night. Reporters, city council members, community leaders, but Mayor Richardson's chief of staff was the call he couldn't ignore. "Chief, we have a situation," the aide said without preamble. "The Williams incident is everywhere. CNN, MSNBC, Fox News. The hashtag is trending in 12 countries. And now we're hearing rumors about a federal investigation." Patterson rubbed his eyes and tried to focus. He'd been chief for 8 years, had navigated countless crises, but nothing quite like this. Usually, police incidents followed a predictable pattern: initial outrage, media coverage, promises of reform, gradual fade from public attention. But this felt different. This felt like it had legs. What does the mayor want? Damage control, fast, and chief. He wants Officer Martinez suspended, pending a full investigation, effective immediately. Patterson felt a familiar knot in his stomach. Suspending Martinez would be seen as throwing her under the bus, abandoning an officer who'd been doing what dozens of officers did every day. But not suspending her would be seen as condoning constitutional violations and racial profiling. There were no good choices left. "I'll draft the paperwork," Patterson said. By 6 a.m., Martinez had driven home to her small apartment in the suburbs. The same apartment she'd bought 3 years ago with dreams of promotion and advancement. She sat in her car in the parking lot, unable to face going inside, unable to face the normal domestic details of her life when everything had changed. Her phone had been buzzing constantly with calls from reporters, from union representatives, from colleagues offering support or distancing themselves. She'd turned it off hours ago. But the silence was almost worse than the chaos. When she finally went inside, she found her laptop open on the kitchen table where she'd left it that morning. Lifetime ago, when she'd been Officer Sarah Martinez, respected member of the Riverside Police Department, guardian of public safety. Now she was Sarah Martinez, viral video star, poster child for everything wrong with American policing. Against her better judgment, she opened her browser and searched for her name again. The results had multiplied exponentially. News articles, opinion pieces, social media posts, YouTube commentary videos. Her professional headshot, the one from the department website, had been screenshot and shared millions of times, usually alongside photos of Zoe, looking young and innocent and accomplished. She clicked on one of the news articles and immediately regretted it. Officer Sarah Martinez, a pattern of abuse ignored. Federal sources confirm that Martinez has been the subject of multiple complaints alleging excessive force and racial bias, all of which were dismissed by the Riverside Police Department's Internal Affairs Division. The incident involving Zoe Williams appears to be not an isolated mistake, but the latest example of systematic misconduct. Martinez closed the laptop and put her head in her hands. They'd found the other complaints. Somehow, someone had gotten access to files that were supposed to be confidential, and now her entire career was being dissected in public. Her doorbell rang. Through the peephole, she saw 2 people she didn't recognize: a middle-aged white man in an expensive suit, and a younger black woman with a recorder in her hand. Reporters. "Officer Martinez." The man called through the door. "We're from the Washington Post. We'd like to give you an opportunity to respond to the allegations." Martinez backed away from the door without responding. How had they found her address? How had they gotten here so fast? Her phone, despite being turned off, buzzed with a notification. She'd forgotten about the automatic emergency alerts that couldn't be disabled. The message was from the Riverside PD Personnel Department, Officer Martinez. Report to Internal Affairs Monday, 8 a.m. for disciplinary here. The federal building's press room had never held so many people. Cameras lined the back wall like artillery, their red recording lights creating a constellation of accountability. Zoe Williams sat at the long table beside her father, her hands folded calmly despite the tremor that only Marcus could see. To her left sat U.S. Attorney Janet Chen, her expression carved from granite and resolve. The room fell silent as Zoe leaned toward the microphone. My name is Zoe Williams, and 3 days ago, I was walking home from photography class when my life changed forever. Her voice was steady, clear, carrying the weight of someone far older than 17. I want to tell you what happened, not because I'm seeking sympathy, but because what happened to me happens to young people like me every single day, and most of them don't have a father who can demand justice. In her apartment across town, Martinez watched the live stream with the fascination of someone watching their own execution. Zoe looked nothing like the suspect Martinez had seen 3 days ago. She looked like what she'd always been, an accomplished teenager, with dreams and dignity and an unshakable sense of justice. Officer Martinez didn't see a student that day, Zoe continued. She didn't see someone's daughter, or a young artist, or a human being deserving of basic respect. She saw what she'd been trained to see, a threat that needed to be neutralized, a stereotype that needed to be controlled. The camera panned across the crowd, catching faces that ranged from anger, to heartbreak, to determination. Among them, Martinez spotted Mrs. Chen from the corner market, Mr. Thompson, who fed stray cats, and dozens of other faces from the neighborhood, people who'd known Zoe as a person long before she became a symbol. But this isn't really about Officer Martinez, Zoe said, and Martinez felt a flicker of surprise. This is about a system that taught her to be afraid of me before she even met me, a system that valued her assumptions over my humanity, a system that protected her mistakes while ignoring my pain. Marcus watched his daughter with a mixture of pride and heartbreak. She'd insisted on writing her own statement, had refused his offers to help craft the language. Now, he understood why. Her words carried an authenticity that no adult speechwriter could have manufactured. My father has spent his career fighting for civil rights, Zoe continued. He's investigated police departments, prosecuted officers, worked to reform systems that treat people like me as less than human. And 3 days ago, he had to watch his own daughter become a victim of the very injustices he's dedicated his life to stopping. She paused, looking directly into the main camera. But here's what I want everyone to understand. I'm not special because my father is Marcus Williams. I'm not more deserving of justice because my family has connections. Every teenager who gets slammed against a wall for walking while black deserves the same outrage, the same investigation, the same demand for accountability. In the crowd, someone shouted, "That's right," and others nodded agreement. The video of what happened to me has been viewed millions of times, Zoe said. People are calling it shocking, calling it unbelievable. But it's not shocking to the dozens of other young people who've been brutalized by Officer Martinez over the years. It's not unbelievable to the communities that have been filing complaints and demanding justice for decades. Janet Chen leaned forward slightly, recognizing the transition into the legal announcement they'd carefully coordinated, which is why Zoe continued. My father and the FBI's Civil Rights Division are announcing today that Officer Martinez's assault on me was not an isolated incident, but part of a pattern of constitutional violations that the Riverside Police Department has systematically ignored. The room erupted. Reporters shouted questions, cameras swiveled, and the energy shifted from emotional testimony to breaking news. Marcus took the microphone. The Department of Justice is opening a comprehensive investigation into the Riverside Police Department. Under Section 14,141 of the Violent Crime Control and Law Enforcement Act, he announced in his prosecutor's voice, calm, methodical, devastating, we have evidence of a pattern and practice of civil rights violations, including excessive force, racial profiling, and deliberate indifference to constitutional rights. He paused for the implications to sink in. Section 14,141 investigations had resulted in federal consent decrees that transformed entire police departments, forcing them to operate under court supervision for years or even decades. Officer Martinez has been the subject of at least 17 formal complaints over the past 4 years, Marcus continued. These complaints allege excessive force, racial bias, false arrest, and civil rights violations. Every single complaint was dismissed by the department's Internal Affairs Division without meaningful investigation. Martinez felt the blood drain from her face. 17 complaints. She'd only been aware of 3 or 4. How many incidents had she forgotten, dismissed, as routine police work, justified as necessary enforcement? Furthermore, Marcus said, our preliminary investigation has identified 3 other officers within the Riverside Police Department who have similar patterns of complaints and violations. This is not about one bad cop, this is about institutional failure at every level. The questions came rapid fire. Mr. Williams, are you seeking criminal charges against Officer Martinez? Will there be federal charges against department leadership? What does this mean for other ongoing cases involving these officers? Marcus raised his hand for silence. Criminal referrals will be made where appropriate. All cases involving the identified officers will be reviewed for potential constitutional violations. And most importantly, the Riverside Police Department will be required to operate under federal oversight until they can demonstrate compliance with the Constitution. But it was Zoe who delivered the moment that would define the press conference. The clip that would be replayed for years in journalism schools and civil rights documentaries. I have one more thing to say, she announced, retaking the microphone. Officer Martinez, if you're watching this, and I think you are, I want you to know that I forgive you. The room went dead silent. Even Marcus looked surprised. I forgive you, Zoe repeated, because holding on to anger would only hurt me more. But forgiveness doesn't mean avoiding consequences. You violated my rights. You assaulted me, and you've done the same to countless others. That can't be undone with apologies or regret. She looked directly into the camera again. But I also want you to know that I understand something now that I didn't 3 days ago. You're not evil. You're the product of a system that trained you to see people like me as threats. You're what happens when bias becomes policy, when prejudice becomes protocol. Martinez found herself crying for the first time since the incident, not from self-pity, but from the devastating grace of being forgiven by someone she'd wronged so profoundly. The question now, Zoe concluded, is whether our community will use this moment to build something better, or whether we'll just wait for the next video, the next hashtag, the next family to be torn apart by preventable violence. The press conference ended with chaos, reporters rushing to file stories, activists planning next steps, officials scrambling to respond to the bombshell announcement. But in her apartment, Martinez sat in silence, processing words she'd never expected to hear. Her phone rang. The caller ID showed her union representative. Sarah, we need to talk. The situation has evolved. Evolved how? The federal investigation changes everything. We can't fight this the usual way. Internal affairs, qualified immunity, procedural defenses. They have you on 17 separate complaints, plus the video, plus federal civil rights charges. Martinez closed her eyes. What are you saying? I'm saying we need to discuss a plea agreement. Cooperation in exchange for reduced charges. They want the department, Sarah. They want to know how this pattern was allowed to continue for so long. You want me to testify against my own colleagues. I want you to avoid spending the next 20 years in federal prison. After hanging up, Martinez walked to her bathroom mirror and stared at her reflection. The woman looking back seemed like a stranger, not the confident officer who'd put on her uniform that morning 4 days ago, but someone hollowed out by consequences, diminished by truth. Her doorbell rang again. Through the peephole, she saw Detective Santos standing alone. No reporters this time. Ray? She opened the door cautiously. Sarah, I came to tell you something. Santos looked exhausted, older than his 48 years. Internal Affairs called me in this morning. They want to know about your training, about complaints I might have heard, about whether I knew you had ... problems. Martinez stepped aside to let him in. What did you tell them? I told them the truth. That I saw warning signs and didn't act. That I taught you to be a cop, but failed to teach you to be human. That I'm as responsible for yesterday as you are. They stood in her living room, two veterans of a profession they'd thought they understood, finally confronting the cost of their willful blindness. Ray, what happens now? Now we face the music. The federal investigators want to interview me tomorrow. They're going to ask about the culture in the department, about how officers like you were protected, about why reform efforts always failed. Santos met her eyes. And I'm going to tell them everything. Because Sarah, that girl didn't deserve what happened to her.